Welcome to the INFOWARS Nightly News. I'm your host, Jakari Jackson. It is June 20th, 2016, and here's a look at our top stories.
Tonight, Barack Hussein Obama continues to protect Islam while attacking Christians. Meanwhile, the Justice Department releases an edited transcript of the 911 call from the radical Muslim terrorists during the Pulse nightclub attack. Then, anti-Trump protesters migrate to Phoenix, Arizona, armed with Mexican flags and a giant inflatable Trump sporting a KKK outfit. Plus, the candidate running against establishment puppet John McCain says the senator is directly responsible for the rise of ISIS.
I know these people. I'm in contact with them all the time.
Joe Biggs talks to Dr. Kelly Ward. All that plus much more up next on the INFOWARS Nightly News.
The latest example of authoritarian censorship by the most transparent administration ever has been defeated. Now, this morning, the FBI and the Department of Justice released a partial transcript from the 911 call made by the Orlando nightclub shooter, Omar Mateen.
And it's been our goal to get as much information into the public domain as possible so people can understand, as we do, possibly what motivated this killer, what led him to this place, and also provide us with information.
Now, the Attorney General said that this partial transcript was released to give people a sense of the motivation of the killer. But how are people supposed to know his motivation if you scrub all references to Islam and ISIS? This seems more in line with the Obama administration's previous efforts to protect Islam. Following some backlash, the FBI and the DOJ reversed course, and they have now released the full transcript, which of course tells us what we already know. So what do you think? Was this a wise move by the Department of Justice to let any future jihadists know that they're not going to be receiving any accolades for committing atrocity? Or is this another Orwellian rewrite of history by the Ministry of Truth? The DOJ replaced Allah with God in the edited Orlando transcript. So this is very odd considering the fact that a veteran was forcibly kicked out of an Air Force ceremony for daring to mention the word God. School children are no longer allowed to recite one nation under God, yet it's okay to edit God into the equation in order to suggest that a terrorist uttered these words when he did no such thing. He said Allah Akbar, not praise God. So obviously, by erasing ties to Islamic extremism here, anyone in the future looking back on this atrocity can recall that this was more about the nation's gun problem or about a young man who was dealing with some of his sexual identity issues, or perhaps even the evils of Christianity, but not Islamic terrorism. Even the New York Times came out last week making excuses for radical Islamists by saying, hold up, Christians, the Bible calls for the execution of gays too. It doesn't. But why is there such a push to demonize Christianity when the only countries currently executing gays, it's state-sponsored execution or just throwing them off of roofs, are nations under Islamic rule? And also considering the fact that ISIS has just released another video threatening an attack in Times Square, as well as U.S. bases around the world, I don't think the administration can continue to pretend that not uttering the words radical Islamic terrorism will somehow magically make it disappear.
That's a great report there from Leanne McAdoo. Now, coming up later in our show, we'll have special reports from John Bounds and others. But first, to focus on this report that Leanne just gave us, that is a perfect example of why I don't just recite the press release, because you guys understand that when you go out to these events, whether it's a riot or anything that may be somewhat controversial, you have many initial reports, right? They'll send out the information that they have on hand at the time that information changes, which is understandable. You get new sources, you get new information, videos are released, and so on and so forth. But then comes the almighty press release. The press release that says that we didn't shoot tear gas at the journalists that were disassembling their equipment, and you're a conspiracy theorist if you say otherwise. And then I just happened to be there that day and had my own footage of it. And yes, they did help them disassemble their equipment, but that's after they shot tear gas and rubber bullets at them. That's a very important detail that was omitted from the press release. And it's getting to the point now where I'm glad people caught this with this DOJ transcript and how they were editing it, not just omitting certain information, but actually changing it to the point where they will change the words Allah to God and other things, like removing out his references to the Islamic State. That is very pertinent information that completely or could completely change the motivation of a suspect in a crime. For example, let's say that somebody in a liquor store got shot by somebody who walked in there, with a shotgun or whatever. Now, a lot of people may assume that this was a liquor store robbery gone bad, but let's say the guys had some personal information, they had a personal interaction, a history, and he got shot because he did the guy some wrong or he felt wronged by the gentleman. That completely changes the dynamic of the liquor store shooting. It wasn't just a robbery, it was some type of revenge scheme or other things like that. And that's the same thing we see with this Orlando shooter. They want to remove certain aspects of it that really show his true motivations. Now, to an extent, I can understand why they want to do this. They don't want to give any credence to these ISIS supporters, these people with this very extremist ideology that says you can go and, someplace and kill people if you disagree with their points of view. I can understand that to an extent, but at the same time, I think you are really doing the people who died there a disservice if you don't show the person's true motivations for why he did the killing in the first place. You can see all the reports out there. They say the guy is more than likely a closet homosexual, had his own views and things like that. He was going out to the club, not just to scout it out, but to participate in the activities. Also, he did say that he was doing this for ISIS, for the Islamic State. These are very pertinent points of view. And when you redact this, and not only redact it, but just completely change the motivation, it's a huge disservice and doesn't really get anything done. So I'm very glad that the DOJ decided to reverse this decision. But once again, people had to hold their feet to the fire for this to happen. Had people just not paid attention to it and they went on and, just talk about Cleveland winning the championship last night, this could have got swept under the rug. And a year from now, people would be going back to the archives and like, hey, didn't he say that he did this for Allah and he did this for the Islamic State? But, luckily people happen to be paying attention to this on this day. Now, something else that people are paying attention to, the situation that is going on in Oakland where the police chief has stepped down. They're running through police chiefs. And the situation with this is they had a number of officers involved with an underage prostitute, thus the allegations are. And they say that the third police chief to be replaced in the last 9 days amid the sex scandal. And an 18-year-old woman has alleged in multiple news media interviews that dozens of current and former officers in 5 cities had sex with her while she worked as a prostitute. And the kicker about this is she was a minor at the time. Now, in connection with this scandal, we've seen multiple officers resign. Some have been put on paid leave and another committed suicide. So it's a very serious situation. And it seems like, at least on the surface, they seem pretty legit as far as getting to the bottom of it. Like I said, they're running through police chiefs. They have sanctions on certain number of officers, but only time will tell if they can actually truly get down to the bottom of it, because, the blue, the blue privilege they refer to sometimes. And there are many great officers out there, but sometimes they don't want that house of cards to fall, because if they take out this guy, then the next guy could fall, then the next guy could fall, then they may get down to somebody else who maybe wasn't involved with the prostitution, but may have some other type of dirt on them that they don't want to get out into the public. And speaking of a guy who has a lot of dirt on him, this is El Chapo. Now, El Chapo is a very interesting case study, in my personal opinion, because you have a guy, Sinaloa cartel, one of the most famous cartels there is, really, even with him currently incarcerated in Juarez, Mexico. But you have a situation with El Chapo. He goes to Juarez, Mexico with his faction, and they commit a massive gang war out there. The reports I saw, they said the highest rated death rate was 2010, where they had 3,000 people murdered by the hands of El Chapo, his warring faction, or just in general. Now, like I said, not all those are contributed to the cartel, but many of those are, and also in your gun-free zone. Also, not all of those were committed by firearms, but many of them were. And now we see that the wife of El Chapo is saying that he needs more humane conditions. And I think this is very interesting for a guy who has committed such horrendous crimes. But they say a former beauty queen, which is his wife, and a U.S. citizen who lives in Mexico, spent several days in Washington, where she held a meeting with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, an arm of the Organization for American States. They say Mexican authorities, citing security concerns, have moved Guzman, that's El Chapo's real name, to a prison in Juarez, Mexico, near the border. Now, thus far, they're saying that his being there hasn't brought any, real security concerns in that particular area. I understand he was moved from a different area, and he's awaiting transport here to the United States pending his trial. But I don't know if you guys ever saw that movie, Sicario. Granted, it is a fictional movie, and I understand that, but many of the things portrayed in there where they were killing journalists, hanging them from the rafters, having shootouts in the street, that stuff really happens. Now, you can say it was glamorized, sensationalized for the movie, but once again, when you look back at 2010, you see that they murdered 3,000 people there in that city. I don't think they had to sensationalize it too much. And quite honestly, I think the world's a little better off with El Chapo behind bars. But at the same time, you have to understand El Chapo is a guy who is being supported, funded, armed by, among others, the United States government. We've seen the reports, the CBS News reports saying that when they went to his bunker, his lair, whatever it was, they found rifles that he had received from Operation Fast and Furious, where they were running guns into Mexico with the notion that they were going to track these guns, and when they find them at, crime scenes, they would arrest the bad guy who had them. I said, that makes absolutely no sense at all. So you're just going to let this guy run wild with the AK-47 or the AR-15 or whatever it is you're trying to demonize this week until you eventually catch up with him. And they said, yeah. Lanny Brewer stepped down. Eric Holder stepped down. Thus far as I know, no big people went to jail over that scandal. Like the two I just mentioned there, they're able to walk away on their own terms. They wouldn't started a private practice with Brewer. I'm not sure what Holder is doing, but he's not in jail. We know that for a bare minimum. And as we're talking about firearms after Orlando, a lot of people want to jump on the gun control bandwagon, but a group that are rejecting this is the Special Forces. It says Special Forces Association rejects calls for gun control from Petraeus and McChrystal. Those you don't know, Petraeus and McChrystal said that we need to tighten down on gun control legislation. And the issue with this is the people in the Special Forces, they realize that the Second Amendment is not a restriction on the individual. The Bill of Rights in general are restrictions on the government. You as the private individual, I understand you have state and local laws that you have to abide by, and you can fight those if you want to, but just in general, you have to abide by your state and local laws, and unless you live someplace like Vermont where they have complete constitutional carry. I believe it's Vermont, I'm going off the top of my head. So and that includes to whether you carry your rifle or your pistol, you can carry it open or concealed, whatever else. But the people in Special Forces, they understand that you need to have the means to protect yourself because there's not always going to be somebody to protect you all the time. And let's say you do call the police and the police show up and they have the best of intentions, but you also have the situation, it was the Empire State shooting a few years back, where the officers in the scene straight out of Pulp Fiction, they pull out their guns, they open fire on the single assailant, if I'm remembering correctly. They hit 9 other people that are not their intended target. You know, I mean, and this is the type of police response you want. You're better off not calling the police, because people have this notion that the cops are always a better shot than the civilians. If you go to some of these shooting ranges and if you watch some of these shooting events on TV, you can see just regular, normal, everyday civilians are incredible shots compared to a police officer. And also we see that the Supreme Court turns down the assault weapons case. Now, in particular, this is referring to New York and Connecticut, where they have the SAFE Act and it bans things like more than 10 rounds in your magazine. Now, there are other things being voted on, but as of this recording, they haven't been official yet. So we'll bring you that news a little bit later in the week. And moving quickly now to our last story, Senator John McCain is directly responsible for the rise of ISIS. And these are the words of Dr. Kelly Ward. She had a chance to speak to Joe Biggs, and that's what she had to say. And I definitely think that John McCain should be held accountable. He's going over there. He's talking to these guys like, I know who these guys are. I have no issue with them. And meanwhile, he's giving them the weapons and all the things they need to succeed. So here's this video, and we'll come back after this break with more special reports.
Joe Biggs here with INFOWARS.com. Now we're inside the Veterans Memorial Coliseum in Phoenix, Arizona, and I'm joined by Kelly Ward. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to be here with all of these great Americans who want to make America great again.
And I'm glad to see someone challenge Senator John McCain. That's really making me happy. So tell me a little bit about your platform and then about the remarks about how you believe he's kind of responsible for the rise of ISIS.
Yes, well, you know, I'm running on a small government platform. Less taxes, less regulations, the strongest defense in the world, the strongest military, personal responsibility, and following the Constitution. I don't think you can go wrong with that kind of a platform. And yes, I took a punch at John McCain. Now, he took a punch at the president, right? Well, kind of. But he punched and then he ran backwards and said, oh, no, I'm sorry, I misspoke. I will tell you that John